I haven't gotten a lot of sleep because I've just been doing schoolwork and watching anime. To be completely honest, I posted on Twitter, and it took me months to do it to get the courage to like, hey, does anybody have any good romance anime, romance yaois to suggest? And most people recommended trash. To be completely honest, people don't have good taste, but there was a few. Yaoi has is a huge there's a huge problem with yaoi generally. Is 80% of it's trash, and 90% of it's really has other problems with it when it comes to like how people should interact around consent.
Yeah.
And the last 10% is actually good. And I'm watching one that's called Banana Fish right now, which still has some pretty like oof themes around it, but at least it doesn't like idolize a lot of those types of things that are idolized sometimes in the other ones.
Yeah.
So which are more masochistic. So I'm happy with my viewing experience so far of it. So I'm happy to finally get back to watching yaoi though. It was one of the few forms of like queer expression I had when I was younger.
Well, that's awesome. I know that I am definitely into Yuri, Girls Love, but it has some similar issues that like very rapey feel to it. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, oh, I understand some people wanting some of that content, but could we get more without that? That would be really
Yeah.
nice.
I just wanted like a skater boy meets other skater boy, and then they make skater flips, and then they kiss. Like that's all I wanted, but
Oh,
instead it's like they're part of a crime syndicate, and masochism has infected that. It's all just twisted up in that. So, ugh.
oh
But
no.
that's how the whole or the last 5-10% that's decent. If you read the mangas, you have the finger problem. I don't know if you've seen this, but if you look up like yaoi hands, you'll see that their fingers are just creepily long. It looks like Slender Man fingers because the artist.
What?
Have you ever looked this up? If you look up, let me see if I can do it right now.
Oh my gosh.
Look up yaoi hands right now, and the first few pictures you'll see immediately what I mean.
Okay, okay. I'm gonna swing over really quick and just yaoi hands.
It is so bad. It is so creepy.
Yaoi hands. I had to like really sound that out there. Oh my gosh, what the heck?
Yeah, I don't know why this is a thing, but
What
it's
the-
I can't take it seriously.
The more you look, the worse it gets.
Yeah, it feels like they're about to like they could just grab my hand and crush it like a can. That's what it feels like.
Oh
Like
my
I
gosh.
think the idea is like, oh, their hands they can hold you tight, but it looks like it just looks like a monster, like their hand was a spider and it transformed into a hand. Like it's just creepy.
I'm looking at the first picture that showed up for me and it just they don't even look real.
Yeah, no,
It's just mortifying.
it's like their hand is half of that person's upper body. It's really just too much.
That's bizarre. Well,
Like that person should become like a baseball like umpire or something because he's in the wrong line of work, whatever he's doing currently.
Yeah, that sounds about right. You never miss catching one with that. That's incredible.
Never,
Oh
never
my god.
become a goalie or something. I don't know.
Goalie. I mean, you could also just be a waiter. Can you imagine how many plates?
I feel like if they stocked shelves like tuna cans and stuff, they could just like do a whole row just by like putting them in front of each other in his hand and just sliding them down or something.
That'd be perfect. Man, maybe this is actually the next human evolution. That's what we need next. Super
Yeah.
long yaoi fingers. Oh my god.
I feel like if there was a scene where they were gonna they're getting deeper into the romance and he goes to like grab their behind or something, they just grab both cheeks. It's just too much.
Just too much. Oh my god. Holy cow. Well, I'm glad that you've been able to get back into YAOI. That's incredible. I know that it can be hard to, especially when everything's so intense with what's been happening politically, get into some of those hobbies. So I'm glad you've been getting back into it. Which, speaking of which, I wanted to ask you how the inauguration went because you got to attend it, right?
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised with the extreme lack of violence. Which
Yeah.
it's weird to say extreme lack of violence, but my last two experiences was helping someone who got stabbed and getting maced by the Proud Boys and charged, and the second one was getting called the F slur, spit on, threatened with execution. So this one was just like me interacting with a person who compared Trump to Zorro, and that was the only interaction I had with a Trump supporter. I saw like one Q thing, but I saw like true Trump supporters at the whole event. The rest were Biden people, locals, people who lived in DC, and were celebrating the fact that Trump was gone because DC voted 93% for Biden. There are not a lot of Trump fans there. But all these outside agitators came in, as the right likes to call the Antifers, came in and caused a ruckus all the other times. But I guess this time, after January 6th, I guess Trump overplayed his hand a little bit. His big yowie hands.
Yeah, I suppose so. It was very fascinating. I'm on the Nextdoor app here. I'm in DC, and everyone was talking about shutting down the Airbnbs and canceling who had been scheduled for around the inauguration. It was very interesting. I was very expecting violence.
Hmm.
I was pretty heavily expecting violence, and then there was none. But did you have like a favorite part of the inauguration ceremony or?
Oh, yeah, I did. I was just walking through the streets of DC, and Riley Grace Roshong, I just met her. She was just there.
Oh,
She was not looking up my street. I just bumped into her, and we just went out. We got lunch. We got Subway. We had to eat outside, but we got Subway. We sat down. We just looked at soldiers marching by for a little bit and talked. And she gave me a ride home because I would have had to use the Metro Pass to get home. And it was very pleasant. It was a very pleasant experience getting to meet her in person. Definitely, she's also active in the Maryland political scene, and I'm trying to see if I can get her to have the I asked if she would write an article because she testified for a bill that would take away the ability for people to use the trans panic defense in murder
mm-hmm.
cases, and I wanted to get her testimony and her published in Maryland Matters, and I contacted the person who works with that, and they seemed very optimistic about it. I'm trying to finalize that so we can have testimony
That's
published in Maryland Matters.
awesome. I am so glad to see it. That's incredible. I
I love her. She's great.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, if you're ever in DC again, when I'm here, I'd love to catch up. That's
Yeah,
incredible. It's so cool
yeah.
to have a few people around here. Um,
Yeah, because everybody else is in California, right?
yeah.
And so us East Coasters, we don't got a lot of people, but apparently we have Riley Grace Roshong. We got me. We got apparently ContraPoints lives in Baltimore.
Hmm.
We have I think what's his face? He was what's his face? What's his name? Caleb not I was supposed to say Caleb Maupin, the one who was
Oh, are you
de-radicalized
talking about
and
Hunter Avalon?
not Hunter Avalon, the one who was de-radicalized from the
Oh,
alt-right.
okay. Yeah,
And
Faraday.
yeah, Faraday Speaks is also in Maryland, I believe.
No, he lives with me.
Oh, I
We
had no
live
clue.
together. Yeah.
I had no clue. Wow.
There is, and I believe Hunter Avalon is actually somewhat close as well, and he is someone who also came out of the right wing. I don't know how far right he was,
Yeah,
but
I'm aware that he has become a centrist now,
oh, has
which
he?
yeah, that's what he went from the right wing to centrism, which you
Oh,
know what? I'm still hey, I'll take it.
that's a start.
I'd rather somebody be like, I'm a Mitt Romney, Joe Manchin type of guy than I'm with Josh Hawley. I'd take that any day.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's at least a marginal improvement or an improvement. Yeah,
Hey, yeah.
but
We're all for marginal improvements. I voted for Biden.
yeah, absolutely. Well. It was speaking of which, how are you feeling about the Biden presidency? Are you seeing anything that you're really enjoying? I know I have to say, like, I'm really excited about the relief he's pushing for, and I'm really
Yeah.
hopeful that the 10K in student loans actually happens.
Hmm. I would say that obviously the 10K in student loans isn't like perfect. It's more than I thought
Yeah,
it
of
was going to get.
course.
I didn't think the Keystone XL pipeline was something he was going to do. That's much further than Obama went on that route. It's nice to see the Muslim ban get overturned. Something one of the most disgusting vestiges of the Trump presidency. I like that he removed the state of emergency, so no more funding can be funneled to the border wall and can be funneled to actual emergency programs. I like that we rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, rejoined the
Yes.
WHO. Those things are really important, and I think people don't emphasize how important it is and downplay it, because if we are not at the table, then other nations will take our spot. Other nations that might not
Hmm.
be prioritize climate change as much as a democratic administration would. Not to mention the fact that we should be, and his pledge to be part of the COVAX program, which is not talked about, which is a program to make sure that nations that don't have the funds to actually acquire coronavirus vaccines, like the nation of like Palestine, for example, can actually get coronavirus vaccines,
Which is
which this
so
isn't talked
important.
about.
Yeah.
But it is an example on how the United States can start to fix its image of being a coronavirus failure, and start to turn it into a coronavirus success story. And I think that's something I got to give him credit for.
Mm.
I would say that generally I've been pleased with most of the stuff I've been seeing. There's been some things like Tony Blinken's announcement on not moving the embassy back or not using it as leverage was disappointing to me. But the vast majority of the stuff I have seen so far has been positive. Of course, there's been negatives, but that's why he wasn't my primary candidate. But it's still much more than I thought it was going to be getting from a Joe Biden administration. So far, I've been mostly complimentary as of late.
Hmm. What are you hoping that he can improve on? If you could push him on one issue, what would be the primary thing you'd want to push him on?
So I would say Yemen, but as far as I know, him and Kamala Harris have both said that they will not support the Saudi war in Yemen. That bipartisan legislation passed the House and Senate. It's right off the Jamal Khashoggi killings, and for all I know, Anthony Blinken, Tony Blinken, and Joe Biden are not for it. So as far as I know, and while a lot of people don't know this, Joe Biden was probably one of the most reluctant voices in the White House to go to war and go to conflicts, which is weird to say that about the person who voted for the Iraq war. But he was the person in the room during the war in Libya saying, let's take a step back and examine this for a second. He was the person in the room saying the same thing about Syria. And I have no reason to believe, to think that he didn't say the same thing probably about Yemen.
Mm.
And his pledge to end our support for it probably aligns with that. So I think he'll go through with it. It's one of the main reasons I supported him, and one of the main reasons I said publicly I supported him. So that'd be something I would be inclined to. But since that specifically, I have no clue if I think he's going to do it, but just to be sure, I would probably push him on that,
Okay, yeah.
because it's a humanitarian disaster. Oh, and he also recently revoked the non-discrimination order that Trump put out, which I also really like,
Oh,
against trans gay people.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I saw that and I was glad to see it happening. Um,
The thing that I will say that is impressing me about what he's doing is there's a lot of people saying he should have done this executive order on the first day. He should have done that executive order on the first day. But Trump did two executive orders on the first day. He
hmm,
did 15. So
yeah.
you can see the scale and the speed at which he's doing these executive orders.
It's so interesting to me because I wish the presidential position wasn't so. Sometimes it feels. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about so many executive orders going through, but of course, when they're for positive things, that's good. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know. That's something I
I
consider a little bit.
The thing that gets me, is the idea that executive order can just be undone by the next president. But
Mm.
so a lot of people saying, so we've made no real progress. I think that's not true. For example, DACA was put into place by executive order, and for the full 4 years of Trump's presidency, it was a bargaining chip. But he never fully threw it under the bus. It was a back and forth bargaining chip, showing
Mm.
that the pendulum has swung so far in favor of the DACA recipients that they felt like they would only really revoke it if there was nowhere left to negotiate with the Democrats, where it was something that we were able to move in a certain direction.
Mhm.
Now, so I think some executive orders through how the pendulum swings, how society changes around it, and what happens in the next 4 years are a little bit more solid. But of course, legally, technically, any of them could be revoked immediately once the next president comes in.
Okay. Well, sometime I might want to come in and or have you pop on if you want to and talk about Yemen. However, I'm trying to get more into international issues. And that's something that's been hitting me a little bit more is that I don't have a lot of knowledge on those. Specifically, I feel like we're very America centric here.
Hmm.
And I'm curious about workers' rights around the world and then also just how the United States has impacted the rest. And that's your specialty, right? So
Yeah.
I think that would be really nice to have you on to talk about in the future. But you've been here and I haven't even popped into our actual topic. So I did want to note it was shocking to me to hear you mention that you were getting called the F slur at the storming of the Capitol for wearing a Biden shirt.
Yep.
Which
And the
that,
long hair, I would assume, right? The
yeah.
effeminate idea around long hair
What's
men.
interesting to me is I was with Faraday and he was recording someone that was getting into this area. It did not look like they were doing a positive thing. They were breaking into this like what looked like some electrical stuff. And
Mhm.
he was recording them and saying, "Hey, I'm recording you. We're going to get the police." And they started yelling at him Antifa and also the F slur. So it seems to be a thing that's just popping up quite a bit. And it seems like a common tactic men use to degrade other men in general. Have you
Mhm.
dealt with or seen that much outside of that? And why do you think that happens?
Um, I think it's something around the idea that men having sex with other men has been used in a certain way in this country and has been viewed in a certain way of this country in a very negative light. Obviously, the idea that men are who are sexually interested in other men are weak, quote unquote, limp wristed, effeminate, unmanly. They can't perform certain duties. They can't raise children. Because the idea would be they can't give birth. They can't. Well, can't give birth to children. They can't have kids in what they would say the natural way is, quote unquote, but that isn't necessarily true. If you're with a trans man who doesn't have a sex reassignment surgery, that it is actually possible to be in a homosexual relationship and have a child,
Mm.
the quote unquote natural way. But what is the quote unquote natural way, really? Um, but the idea is that it's not the normal way we have structured how men are supposed to act. Therefore, it is negative. Therefore, it is bad. Sexual violence also has been used against men in a certain way, like with rape in prisons, and specifically rape against other men as a form of domination, as a way of humiliation.
Hmm.
This happened during, for example, during the times of slavery. Um, uh, Slave masters would rape enslaved people, not just for specifically to dominate them. This happens currently within prisons. Men are raped, and it's viewed by culture as a form of punishment, which is
Hmm.
extremely disgusting, extremely gross. And that has also been so the idea of pushing those types of things on men is something else that happens. But I think it is basically a view from the rest of society as homosexuality as being a weak, unmanly thing, even though what is manly, what is weak is something that I would disagree with them what is that, because I would think being able to go to a Capitol protest wearing the opposition's hoodie and getting threatened with execution and yelling back at them after they threaten me with execution, is that unmanly? Is standing up for my community manly? Is coming into a community that you're not a part of and burning the property of black churches or tearing down monuments to people who were killed by police brutality, Or is sedition manly? I don't think so. I don't think flying the flag of a loser rebellion, the Confederacy, and putting it inside the Capitol is something I would say is manly. Maybe it's toxic masculinity, but certainly isn't manly. I think winning is pretty manly, but the Confederacy, that's kind of losers. Not to mention they're also flying the flag of another loser. His name is Donald J. Trump. I guess they just don't know how to pick a winner every once in a while. They need to fix that.
Oh my
Change
God,
that.
Dylan
I don't know.
roasting MAGA people. Oh my goodness. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I like.
And even when they do win, they can't win the popular vote. So I mean, even that's half-assed.
God. Who knew Dylan came on to roast the MAGA pals? No, I definitely hear you on that. It's almost interesting. It is a form of trying to assert their own masculinity by attacking yours, perhaps, and trying to fight over that battle over what is manly. And that's very interesting to me, because I try to not define masculinity, and I argue against that. But I definitely understand when you're speaking to those people who are so deeply buying into being a man is good and important and core to my identity. How do you speak to them? How do you reach out and maybe interact with that, communicate with that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we could say that the idea of masculinity has changed throughout history. Somebody in chat was just bringing up in ancient Greek culture, or Spartan culture, or ancient Greek cultures of the world, some of the most powerful and most deadly warriors were homosexuals who were in the military and engaged in sexual acts with other men. And then they went and fought wars for 20 years before going home and building a family. Is that unmanly? I mean, maybe, I don't know, going to the Capitol and flying the Confederate flag is more manly than that somehow, and allows you to denigrate others. But personally, when I talk about masculinity, I try to associate it with positive things, not promoting losers or being a racist prick. Like, for instance, raising a family and being a good father is something that I would say is pretty masculine. The idea is, if you produce a family, if you have become part of a family, you take care of the family in a way by either providing a loving environment. And you can do that in multiple ways. By being a stay-at-home dad is one way, by helping produce an income for that family is another way, and providing emotional support. Taking care of your kids is another thing that I think is pretty manly. I think that standing up for what you believe in is pretty manly. I think expressing yourself openly is pretty manly. I think what Harry Styles did by wearing the dress is manly, because he knew that was going to get backlash. But I don't agree with Candace Owens that that's going to create a plot where the Chinese government takes over the world. I think it just was a person expressing themselves freely, which I thought this was the country, the land of the free. You do what you want, you do what you please. Even though I think he's British, but the same principle applies. So I would like to, I can understand why you wouldn't want to say this is manly, this isn't manly. I want to associate, since there is things that people already associate with what is and what isn't manly, I want to associate more positive things with what is manly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things that I think that are producing good environments, that I think are not things that most people would even debate when it comes to expressing yourself freely, taking care of your family, being supportive, stuff like that.
No, I definitely hear you. I would love to. We'll probably dive into the future of gender, maybe in the rest of the stream. But I wanted to go ahead and get into talking about, well, our topic, men. This is a really incredible time to have you on. I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this specific topic. Men are not supposed to speak up about abuse that they've experienced within masculine circles, or because it seems like a challenge to their masculinity. This is something our chat was talking about earlier, is just the difficulty of speaking up as a man who has been abused, and how that might shatter people's perceptions of them and their masculinity. But I think that some of your redefinitions of that might include speaking up on this,
Yeah,
right? As a
yeah.
masculine thing.
Standing up for yourself is, I think, is something that is masculine. I think one version of that is speaking up when something wrongful has occurred, speaking up against injustice, speaking up against harm. Men have always been viewed as protectors in a way, and I think a version of that, one that is good for society, is protecting other men and make creating an environment that's supportive, that lets them know that you can be a victim, you do deserve support, and we should create resources and should create content that is not only um, helping people after the fact, but help to negate it from even happening in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on here and being willing to open up and bring that. Would you want to go ahead and share your story with us?
Sure. When I was 5, I lived with my mother in an apartment with my stepfather. My mother and my father never got married. It was, as far as I am aware, an accidental pregnancy. And for that, and my mother was using a drug known as heroin when she was pregnant with me. And so it, it was pretty messy. There was a good chance I was going to get aborted. That didn't end up happening. They took the risk of me possibly coming out addicted. Thankfully, I did not come out addicted. There was a conversation about putting me up for adoption that ultimately did not happen. And For a while, I lived with my grandparents, but then I moved in with my mother and my stepfather, and I was going back and forth as she kept consuming because she was never able to really get off of the drug. And so I went to this school where, at the end of it, of course, my mother is supposed to pick me up from school. One moment, let me close the door. My door is wide open. I should probably close it.
Mm, yeah. Thank you, Chap, by the way. I appreciate it. Please take care of yourself.
And so one day when she failed to bring me up, I don't know if she picked me up. I don't know if she was using. Sometimes she would bring me to these drug houses and picked up the stuff with me. That occasion I was at school. I don't know if she was using. I would assume that was the case. Why she didn't pick me up, because a lot of times I would just be left at school because
Mm.
she would be too busy doing stuff with other stuff. A larger somebody, man in his 30s, came into the room because I was set aside in a room to wait for my mother, and he orally raped me at the age of 5. And it was something I didn't really talk about with anybody because I didn't really understand what happened at the time. And as time went on, I barely brought it up ever, if at all, in conversation. And I think after a while, I did eventually bring it up during a therapist meeting. But when I did, it just we talked about it once and then it was never brought up again. And I
Mm.
brought it up one other time at a separate therapist, and they tried to bring in like a therapy student or like somebody learning to be a therapist to use me as like a case study for them, and it
Mm.
made me feel very uncomfortable. And I didn't really want to share my experience after that.
Yeah.
And later when I ended up, this is connected to this, but I'll get back to the story quick. But later when I ended up bringing this up with my grandparents later, and I learned more stories that made me kind of connect the dots on like figure out when this happened, because again I was 5 and there's only so much I remember.
Mm-hmm.
She said to me, "Oh well, you brought it up once at the meeting and never again, so like we thought it wasn't a problem." Which I guess for me it was like I brought it up because it takes a while to build up to that point, and
Mm-hmm.
you just don't bring it up in random conversation. So that was
Yeah.
probably why it was not addressed again, because I guess she thought I got it off my chest, so the problem was gone.
Oh.
um that was the first time something like that happened. The second time something like that happened is I was much older. I was like 16 or 15 at the time, and I was on a boat, and on that boat a woman was attempting to sexually assault me, and everybody else on the boat saw what was going on, but they didn't really do much. They were just like, "Hey, lay off," and that was basically it.
Mm.
And then afterwards, when I brought this up to somebody, they basically blamed me for not like pushing this woman off me, who was like in her 40s, pushing this woman off me, or stopping her in some other way, even though, I'm a 16-year-old like guy who's like interested in boxing and sports and some has somewhat broad shoulders. Me using force in any way like that could be perceived in an extremely negative light, and not to mention the fact it would also be perceived like, oh, you wanted it, you're a kid, you should be happy to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and not to mention, I just froze up. But
Yeah.
that blame was placed on me for that situation occurring,
I'm
even though that
sorry to
was
hear that.
a 40-year-old woman acting predatory towards a minor. And so those were my two experiences, and I never really talked about it. I never even. The thing is, you don't register that you were raped, or at least in my case, I didn't register it at the time. I was 5. I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I kind of I more registered the second instance because I was older. So for a very long time, it was just something that happened. It's like
Mm-hmm.
me remembering, like, oh, I scraped my knee. It's just a memory in the back of my head because I didn't put that under that this is when I was raped file. This was just a thing that happened. And I remember talking to my girlfriend a few months ago. It was probably 6 or 7 months ago now, where I was basically talking to her and I brought this up at some point. I don't remember why. And and I went back and forth with her, and she basically, I came to this realization that, oh, I was raped.
Mm.
And it was a realization at 18, 19 years of age, like some 12, 13 years later, I'm figuring out, oh, that was a rape
How did
because it was just a thing that happened to me because I could, the idea of a man getting raped was not a thing in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And how, like, when you realize, like, I was raped, what were the emotions there? How did you feel about that? Do you remember?
Well, I think it explained a lot of my. That's the first thing. Like, it was kind of like a me realizing a lot of stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
due to my mother's, there's a million reasons why I didn't have like an extremely happy childhood. Um, with my mother's drugs and her homelessness and the certain stuff I don't really want to get too deep into, and of
Of
course the
course.
sexual abuse. It made me a very violent child. Like, I mean, I don't talk about it a lot, but I mean, like, it went to the point where I was mugging people when I was
Mm,
younger. Like, I was lashing out a lot.
mm,
Um, and I think and I mean, I remember at one point I made an attempt on my life when I was like 12, which somebody being so young, it's not something you usually do at the
yeah.
type of age. So I think it explained a lot of it since it was never addressed in any manner. And that's on top of the drugs, on top of the abandonment issues with my mother, on top with having a strained relationship with my father, and me dealing with depression at that age, and all these things, they kind of like stacked on top of each other. And I think it helped explain a lot of the earlier psychological, emotional, um, and educational problems that I had. And that was the first thing I kind of went through. And I guess the second thing, emotion that I kind of went through was just I guess it was just like a wave of kind of just emotions that I never processed, just coming all at once. That this
Yeah.
was a thing that happened to me, and I guess it's still not something I've completely processed. I mean, what am I supposed to feel? Am I supposed to feel sad? I don't really feel sad. I just feel more like, I guess, dirty in a way. I really don't know
Mm,
how to explain it. It was a thing that happened. I guess a big way to put it is emasculated.
yeah.
It's probably the best way to put it. That I feel like something was stolen from me, and that was like a sense of honor and dignity, and being able to be a man and stand up for myself in that way, because I did not have the ability to. And so, even though there's no way anybody in their right mind would think that a 5-year old would have the ability to defend themselves in that situation,
Hmm.
due to how that's perceived, I felt emasculated, and I still, to an extent, feel somewhat emasculated by the whole idea that it occurred.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I can't even imagine trying to process because that's like such a fundamental part of a lot of guys' identities, right? Is that
Hmm.
sense of masculinity. That's got to be
Hmm.
really, really hard to work through on. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I think I compensated a lot of ways when I was younger. The idea of me bringing like knives to school and mugging people in a bathroom or something, or being violent and getting fights all the time and bashing people over the head with textbooks or whatever, was just a form of me trying to make up for this idea that I was emasculated. I was hurt in that way, and so I need to prove that I'm manly. What's manly? Violence is manly.
Yep.
Being strong and powerful is manly. Um, and so I got in a lot of fights. Like I said, I brought weapons to school to quote unquote protect myself. I smuggled cigarettes and did all that dumb kid stuff. Uh, kid stuff. I don't think all kids did that, but so I think I compensated for it in other ways, and I think my father also has a very different view of what being a man is than me, now at least, and I think that also somewhat influenced me when I was younger, since he had a very different view on homosexuality than I did, and so that was also something that affected me.
Hmm. Yeah, I saw you tweet out something about it was the cutest tweet about, how, oh, well, I'm straight, but I just this guy's cute. And oh wait, this guy too. And has that been do you feel like what happened in that sense of emasculation, and do you feel like that processing that trauma, or any of the feelings around masculinity, do you feel like that makes it harder to talk about those things?
So I this is something that I've gone public with very recently. So even some of my most basically none of my family even knew about this. My father still doesn't know about it, and I'd rather not even have that conversation with him. And I
Yeah.
hope the grapevine never gets to him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that conversation is just not to be had with certain people. It's better left away from that. I already don't like that my father found out that I liked men. That was his own experience. I remember it was there was basically something slipped out, and his girlfriend at the time, who used to take money off of me to go buy drugs when I was like 14 or 15, um, heard that I was gay, and she promised not to tell him. And literally 5 minutes later, I hear like a yell from the room because she went and
Oh.
immediately told him. And basically, the story is he was balled up his fists. He was super super angry, and he didn't like yell at me though. He was just thankfully after some time he like eventually told me like if you end up being with a guy, it's whatever. You're still my son, which I appreciate. It's just when I was younger, what I would hear is thank God my only son ain't gay, right?
Hmm.
Like I'm his only son, right?
Yeah.
So if I end up being with a guy, then that's his bloodline destroyed. That's me destroying the the one thing he has, right? Because the rest of his family doesn't really aren't super tight with him anymore.
Hmm.
And like I everything in the will signed to me, like yeah, like I'm his best buddy, and I ruin that if that's me, and that basically pushed me away from it as well.
That's a lot of pressure. A lot
Yeah.
of pressure. Holy cow. Well, I'm so sorry, but I am. It's refreshing to have you pop on and start just casually talking to me about yaoi. That's so wholesome to me. And I'm really like I gotta just say I'm really impressed that you can come on, and I know there's still a lot of processing. I'm sure. I have no doubt. Um, these things are not easy, but it's incredibly amazing to me that you can come on and you're talking more openly about these things, both being interested in yaoi and then being able to talk about your experience. um
Yeah.
so thank you. Yeah.
It's difficult for both actually. Still, the first one obviously it's difficult to recount
Yeah.
what happened. The thing about these types of memories is a lot of people have this like movie style idea about these types of memories where you have nightmares every night and it's super vivid, everything that that's not how I experience it. Maybe that's how others do it, but that's never how I experienced it. It's certain details you remember very vividly, but most of it was a blur to me. I was 5. I
Mm-hmm.
remember that I was in the Lego corner of the room.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I remember in one part. And the only other thing I really remember is the taste. And I wish it was anything else that I
Yeah.
remembered. But that's the thing. Anytime I retell this story, that taste comes back in my mouth. It's my most vivid memory of the whole experience, and that is something that I can't erase from my mind. And that's the one thing that I'm angry that the person robbed from me is that sense of innocence when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
Because it that was just a constant presence even when I didn't think about it. Because even if I didn't think of it as a rape, that specific part would pop in my mind about. That would be something that would cause nightmares, which does happen. It still happens to nightmares. But
Yeah.
that specific experience or other experiences of rapes and sexual assaults being done up on upon me in certain dream settings, definitely, and even more frequently probably because I never addressed the issue directly. So of course that's difficult to talk. Not to mention the fact that of course it is once I went public with it, it was immediately something that people used against me.
Oh, was
Um,
it?
yeah, it was something that people used against me. Certain figures would send me certain DMs that were very not kind to the fact that I was in their eyes emasculated in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, or someone to say that you've been made a woman or something like that, or no wonder you're left wing, or blah, 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 blah.
Oh,
There's some certain things like that, or just very unseemly comments. But it's at the end of the day, I've learned to just mostly mock them. Um, uh, but it's still not it's still not pleasant. Because
yeah.
even if I can mock them, it's still because none of their comments specifically really hurt me in that way. It's just the memory that hurts me, right?
Yeah.
They can say the most vile thing about what happened, and it doesn't really hurt me. It's just now I got to think about that thing that happened that gets me,
Yeah.
right? They could. The thing is, if someone was to respond, "You were raped," or "You were raped," and then a million other bad things, it has the same effect at the end of the day because then I just start thinking about the thing that happened. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, the amount of positive messages I've received from other men who have had similar experiences, who have never gone public about it, and how this has made them re-examine that part of their life, and how they really appreciate seeing that representation, makes that most certainly worth it. Because I did not realize how important that type of representation was until Terry Crews actually came out,
Ah,
talked about what
yeah.
happened to him. That was actually make a massive thing for me.
How did that
Uh,
impact?
you,
Excuse me? I'm sorry?
oh, sorry. Yeah, that impacted me. That didn't make me realize I was raped, even though it was something that I was extremely supportive of Terry. I was super happy to see him do it, and it did relate to the more sexual assault I faced later. But now going forward, seeing that representation has helped me be able to be more like public about it.
Yeah.
Definitely because Terry Crews is like supposed to be is the manliest man. He
Mm.
is he's the Old Spice guy. What is more manly than the Old Spice guy?
Nothing.
And literally nothing. And he
Just a
was sexually
crazy
assaulted. He speaks up
SJ'd
about
up
it, and
monster
that was
that
super cool to me.
wants to
Yeah.
But even him, he got that back. Wendy Williams and her reporting on what happened was absolutely disgusting. The way she was talking about how he was getting all chatty, and how what he did wasn't brave, and why didn't he just push him off, basically type of dialogue from Wendy Williams. And that type of stuff is on national primetime television being said by one of the most popular um, gossip bullshit artists in the country.
And that's just dreadful. It's just
It
spreading
is
that.
is absolutely dreadful. But then you can see like this type of culture is toxic. How 50 Cent later made a joke about it later, or to some extent, and this is something. This is just a toxic part of masculinity, of the idea that that is an emasculating event. So therefore, from now on, we can just use it as a weapon against you to remind you that you're now lesser of a man,
Yeah.
which that is extremely painful. Not to mention the fact with the lack of representation in media, with how that's not the idea of disabuse is being done to men is not really topic of discussion. There not being really many resources for men who have suffered these types of abuses. There's a certain set of challenges that men face that are just, I think, different from other survivors in a way that uh, for example, this is a big thing for me. I never saw Me Too and thought that was a thing for me,
Oh.
because I never saw it as, because what I picked up, and I was younger, like when the Me Too movement go, it was 2017. I
Mm-hmm.
was at the time I was 16 during Me Too, 16, 15, 16. Um, I saw that as that I saw, and it didn't help me alleviate that at all. Rape is a thing that men do to women,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I took away. And I took away it was a bad thing, that it was an evil thing, that it was abusive, which are all the correct things to take away. But I never took away from that discussion that that is a thing that a person does with another person. I took away from that, and the way it's perceived in popular media is that they think that a man does to a woman,
Yeah.
which um, I feel like it should be more viewed as it's a thing that is a person does to another person. And I think that's how it should be more perceived in popular media. And I think that should be talked about more. And I just wish that there was more voices that, I guess, looked like me during that movement. That representation wasn't there. And it was only until Terry Crews came out that I ever got a connection to anything, which I guess you could say was part of the Me Too movement, but I guess I just never felt like it.
Yeah. That actually brings me into something I was wondering. Um, I've been able to talk to a few people who have experienced sexual assault, of all genders, but I'm curious, how do you feel like you do you feel like you relate to women survivors at all when you hear them speak up? Do you feel like you have some commonalities, and what differences do you feel there are, if any?
I do 100% relate to them. At the end of the day, we are two human beings who were violated in a way that is uniquely horrific.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is something that makes it difficult to see any images about it, any reports about it. Where for me, and it's hard to explain, but seeing that someone was raped always has a bigger impact on me than someone was murdered, just because of that personal experience. So I still relate to them 100%. It's just seeing somebody that looks like me in representation helps me know that that is something that I can have happen to me. The
Mm-hmm.
same way that if someone sees someone that looks like them do a job, then they can kind of make the connection that that is somebody who I could do that job,
Yeah.
um, which is talked about. So that's the big disconnect for me, is that I never saw that representation when I was younger, because it's not what is perceived in popular media. It's not perceived in popular dialogue, and it's not seen as something like masculine men talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So that was not really something. I would say that's a different challenge, is the realizing and overcoming the emasculation, where the emasculation is a certain type of humiliation that I
Mm-hmm.
think is different, where there's always a humiliation and domination aspect of rape,
Mm-hmm.
but the emasculation is a different type, which I
Yeah.
think deserves different types of dialogue around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you think of that, um, emasculation, and I was also thinking about you talking about the ways that you tried to compensate for that
Hmm.
emasculation. Now it seems like your perception of masculinity, um, your idea of masculinity seems to have taken on quite a bit of a change. And I hear you when you critique those MAGA people who
Hmm.
attack you and attack people they perceive, men they perceive as not masculine in their particular way. It sounds almost like you would disagree with your previous conceptions of masculinity. I'm curious, how did that come about? What changed that? Do you know?
Um, I would say after my mother passed, I got more politically involved, more knowledgeable, tried to learn more. And as I explored myself personally, I I started to realize that my clothing doesn't define what is masculine. The way I talk, the me getting violent doesn't define what's masculine. It is certain, I think, positive characteristics that I would rather associate with being masculine, standing up for oneself, being supportive of others, etc., etc. And everything, just because something is, I would rather have all these positive things be associated with what I see as masculinity than all of these negative things. Because what what did I contribute to the world by hitting some kid over the head with a textbook? That was violent. Grr. That didn't do anything productive. Me getting in fights all the time. Me, if I was to call somebody something homophobic like the F slur, that doesn't prove anything. That doesn't say anything about my character other than me, I guess, stupid and hateful. So
Insecure.
insecure. And I guess as I slowly discovered how I wanted to express myself in certain ways, and how I viewed other men in a manner that is not traditionally masculine, I guess you could say, I started to feel like there's nothing wrong about this, and I'm not a different person now. Nothing fundamentally changed about who I am. I still stand up for what I believe in politically. I still boxed in high school when I was figuring out that I liked men. I was boxing and I thought I was gay. I didn't know I was bisexual. I just thought it was, and I was, for all intents and purposes, a gay boxer. My coach never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
But for all intents and purposes, I was a gay boxer, getting in fights, getting punched in the face, leaving the ring with bloody noses. And nobody could say, well, because that dude sleeps with another guy, no, now he's no longer masculine, as I'm, fighting people in the ring and doing all these other things that would be considered traditionally masculine. If I was to put on a dress, that would not fundamentally change who I am as a person. So I guess it was just my slow evolution of me discovering myself, me just both politically and as a individual, and my evolving view of what is the positive thing men can contribute to society. Because I'd rather, when people talk about masculinity, I'd rather not hear about bar fights or sexual harassment. I'd rather hear about supporting one's family, supporting one's community, standing up for yourself. That's things I would rather like hear about when I hear the term masculinity come up.
I appreciate that. I think that's a really positive step forward for sure, because I've heard multiple accounts of that compensation that unfortunately happens when something like a sexual assault, or for some men like them finding out they're infertile, how that compensation comes through, or even just like, not having a job that they can afford to have a stable family. So
Mhm.
I really like how
Or
you.
being a stay-at-home dad. I think that's
Mhm.
extremely masculine, because that is raise doing everything in their ability to raise their own child to be a productive member of society, and showing your love for them. And the idea that people go out to work, why do people go out to work? Because they love their family. And that
Yeah.
is just a man expressing that love in a different manner. And I think love for one's family, love for one's loved ones is extremely masculine.
I love how you define that. I think it's such a step forward. And we were talking a bit about the issues of the gender roles and how they build distrust between genders, and how there's a lot of damage that can come out of these expectations. I like how you shift them, and what you're seeing moving
Mhm.
forward, trying to move towards a what sounds to me like a healthier society overall, and a happier, like more
Mhm.
free. Um, so Not to be too American in here, but we just like some gender freedom, please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how anybody would think I'm an American. I don't know why, but I have two American flags in here. There's one there, and I got one on a pole for when I go to protest.
There
Uh,
you go.
yeah, trying to take it back for the left.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
so that's the one side of mess of me. Why that was a long diatribe of why it's difficult for me to talk about that, and it's still difficult for me to talk openly about my attraction to men. That tweet about asking for romance, Yowies, it took me 4 months of that in drafts for me to tweet that out
Oh no, you
because
could
I
have
was
had so much more good YAOI so much earlier.
yeah I was looking at it like, is this an inappropriate thing to post online? What will people think of this? Will this be used against me? Will people well, there's also, will people think it's cringe because it's anime, which I think that's a perfectly fair criticism. um
True.
but
Freaking
it,
weebs.
but when I was younger, those were the only things I knew how to access online that were like openly queer content. And
Mhm.
for that type of content was the stuff when I was younger. That was the only type of openly queer content that I could do. Was that always the best openly queer content could consume? No, but it was something when I didn't have anything, which I appreciated. Um, so that took me a while to say. Just being able to say that person, that guy is attractive, is a thing that's difficult for me to say. And I'm trying to kind of make myself do it more because it's fun. I enjoy it, and I know that if anybody else was to say that about somebody of the opposite gender, then nobody would bat an eye. And so I want to start acting as if it was like that for me, where I should do it and nobody bats an eye if I say, "Oh, that's a cute guy." Just being able to express myself in that way. It's still extremely difficult. I find it hard because it just feels like something that it should not be public. That's something like you keep private. It That's how I've always felt. And if I wanted to keep it all private, that's one thing, right? If I wanted to this all to be a private thing and all like not something to really talk about, which many things I don't do that with. I don't talk about my faith publicly. I don't a lot of my private life I think stays private. I know that's difficult when you're a streamer, but I do it to the best of my ability. I believe streamers have a right to a private life as well. Um,
What a
but
concept.
what a concept. Um, but this is something that I think is part of who I am, and I want to be open about that part of who I am.
Absolutely. And what do you think are some things that I kind of wanted to get into, like your experience and you speaking up about your experience and how people have received that. It seemed like a lot of dismissal, a lot of not wanting to handle it or wanting it to be already
Hmm.
handled. Um,
Yeah, it seemed like I think people didn't know how to deal with it
mhm.
because this isn't something people are used to dealing with, or if they didn't want to deal with it when it came to the sexual assault, it was just complete dismissal. Anytime I didn't want to enter a sexual situation, it was viewed as very negative, and I got very negative responses to that. I remember on my 16th birthday, my father was taking me to the Tilted Kilt, which, to be very blunt, is basically a Scottish titty bar, right?
Mm.
And that made me very uncomfortable. I don't find that setting to be very fun. I find it awkward. I feel like I'm paying for people to act a certain way with me. I don't think anybody's like, it's just not a fun experience for me. I think I find it very weird and I don't like it.
Mhm.
And if people want to work there and do, that's their own thing, it's whatever, but that I just don't enjoy it. And I was like, "Dad, I don't want to do this." And he was like, "Nah, come on." You're like, and I was saying a million times over, I didn't want to do it. And then other men that I didn't even know saw what was going on and then started egging me on to do it too, even though I did not want anything to do with it whatsoever. And that kind of shows the kind of reinforcement of that. I don't know what I'm getting. What was I getting at again? I completely lost track.
We were getting into how people deal with you talking about this.
Oh yeah. So that type of that type of situation is pushed on me to be very
Mm-hmm.
sexual, right?
Yeah.
So when a woman act that way towards me, even though if they're in their 40s and I'm a minor, and I didn't openly reject it, push them off, then it was my fault, or maybe I wanted it, or
Mm-hmm.
something along those lines, which is extremely toxic, extremely messed up. Because I was a minor, she was a 40-year-old woman. I was not attracted to her in any way. If I'm 16, then I would be attracted to other people who are 16. I would be
Mm-hmm.
attracted. This is not a novel concept that people are usually attracted to people around their own age when they are growing up, right? Um, and I was not attracted to a 40-year-old woman making sexual advances on me while she was drunk on a
Yeah.
boat around friends and family.
Of course. Yeah.
So I think that the response to that was pretty toxic. The response to the 5-year-old is nobody in my family life, of course, said it was your fault. Um, but there was people who kind of just wanted the situation to go away because they didn't know how to deal with a man having to go through that. They probably don't even know how to deal with anyone going through that, but especially a man, because that's not usually how that goes. And so they thought, like, I talked about it once and I didn't publicly ever talk about it again, so whatever. Because but I was also conditioned at a very young age to deal with trauma in a very certain way. I went through so much at a young age that I still find it difficult to deal with trauma. I lost my godmother 5 days ago, and I still haven't cried about it, even though I was extremely close with her. She was the reason I was able to even develop a relationship with my father,
Mm-hmm.
who I wouldn't have had one otherwise. I mean, she took more care of me than my actual mother did,
Mm-hmm.
and so I still haven't gone through the weaning process. I remember the day my mom died. The next day I was at school, because that's just how I dealt with it. It was
Yeah.
just, you keep going. That's how a man deals with trauma. Yeah, you keep working and you rest when you're dead. And
I.
so that's how I dealt with that
Mm-hmm.
personally. Yes,
Yeah.
and yeah,
I see that from my father as well. Like his father was in the hospice passing away, and my uncles kept saying to me, "Where's your dad? Where's your dad?" And I say, I don't think he knows how to handle this. Like he handles this by staying busy. And what do
yeah.
you like? Are
Can I
you
make
trying?
a
Go ahead.
comment here quick? I
Absolutely.
think I think a big reason why I was so politically active when I was so young and been done. I don't want to like brag, but I've done a lot. Is that I've had so much trauma that I just filtered it all into that, all into politics, and that's why I've been able to. I managed a political campaign at 18. It did all of it, and so when people ask me about it, like, man, Dylan, aren't you proud of like da da da? And I'm like, I'm usually like, no, I'm not. If honestly, I wish I could take it all back. I wish I didn't do it. Now that I'm here, of course, it gives me certain advantages that I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
take advantage of. But I wish I just like got to play video games or got to just go to parties or got to do any of that. But I was
Mm-hmm.
too busy on this quest of dealing with trauma and wanting to deal with my mother's death in a certain way and deal with this being raped in a certain way, and filtered it all into activism, because I just thought, like, I keep working, just keep going, and I still do it. I still do it. Ever
Yeah.
since my godmother died, I've just been working nonstop. It's been hard for me to sleep. Very hard for me to sleep.
So that's a question I'd love to get into is that something you find beneficial? Is that something you want to continue doing, or is that something you
Sleep.
want to is that something you'd like to change? Do you feel like you process your emotions? Because for me, I've also like dove into certain things thinking I really just, it's for me, it's been escapism and a sense of control, right? Like you want to change it so other people don't go through terrible
It's
things. Or where are you at?
it's like I've gone through two, three, four. I've gone like through five to seven therapists at this point,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I've had therapists quit with me being their final person, right? Which
Mm.
is a weird feeling, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like, did I break you? And I'm like, I
Oh
hope not,
no.
right?
Oh
Was I like,
no.
man, I'm not solving this textbook? It got to a point where some of my therapists didn't even talk therapy with me anymore. But the final sessions, we just talked about history because they knew I liked history, right?
Oh.
it just got to that point. So it almost feels like if I haven't been able to do it through all this other, like all this medical treatment, all this, and a lot of the therapy was just like the kid misbehaved, up his medicine dosage, right? And the medicine dosage is the medicine I took as a child was the worst because what it
Mm,
did, it just numbed all my emotions and made me a work machine.
yeah.
So it was like a lot of bad factors that actually led to me doing all this work at a young age. So it's hard for me to like look at it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, a big thing that's hard for me to mentally manage is the fact that I got involved in politics because of my mother's passing and her homelessness and her drug use and her last conversation with me being about how she was scared she was going to lose health insurance, and having that counterbalanced by the fact that her irresponsibility and addiction was the thing that got me raped, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the like quote unquote. I'm not. It's not a revenge quest, but the quote unquote revenge quest. The whole thing. Motive. It's just all these emotions are just so intertwined that I. It feels like if I pull out one Jenga block, the whole thing will collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for a lot of people, a lot of men, they've gone through so much to a point. Well, in my case, at least, that all you can do is kind of steal through it.
Mm-hmm.
Because where do I even begin?
Yeah, that's absolutely tough. I think a good start, though, and I'd be curious your thoughts on it, is being able to open up and recognize those issues and call them out. But I guess it is after that, like, where do you go from there? And I think that can be a really tough thing.
There's, I would say that there's not really much more I can do. I've gone through all the therapy. I've gone through
Mm-hmm.
medication. I've talked about it publicly, privately. I've kind of relived it, um, and talked about it endlessly. So I think it's just maybe time. Maybe some of these scars are too deep for me to ever fully heal.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
there's no way I can ever fully heal from what happened to my mother. That is something that is burnt into my brain. Obviously, the same thing goes to the rape.
Mhm.
If anything, it's a fuel that motivates me to keep working. And if that fuel wasn't there, I wouldn't be doing what I was doing. I'd be like making video games or being like a marine biologist. Every kid wanted to be a marine biologist at one point for some reason, but that was I'd be doing something like that. I wouldn't be doing this because I don't enjoy activism. I don't enjoy it. I see it as a necessary thing that somebody has to do, and so it's something I'm doing as a result of this. So I don't really think there's really a point for me to fully heal. Um, I think there's just ways for me to kind of negate the pain.
No, I think that's a very I definitely relate to that. I don't think these things ever go away. I do think they lessen with time, and I'm very impressed with you being able to stand up and speak on them, like I've said multiple times. Um, but yeah, I think there are points at which it's like, and I think you've done a lot with reconceptualizing your idea of masculinity and
Hmm.
dealing with some of those like behaviors that came out of that. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with is negative behaviors coming out of that and having to identify them. But I'm I think you hit it right on the head, and it's a really difficult thing to feel like maybe this doesn't go away, but I hope that with time you do see it lessen. Um, and
Yeah.
I've
I,
noticed
I
that's a common experience.
yeah, I will say that after I talked about it publicly, I was able to I was able to deal with a lot of my emotions a lot more effectively because it was getting to like a boiling point with just so much happening at the same time because it was COVID, all this on top of COVID and losing so many people during COVID, uncles, my godmother, just and so many family members and friends that it was just a lot. And I think that being processing, finally getting to this scar that's 13, 14 years old, and finally processing it and acknowledging what's happening, what happened, and going through it. It did help. It did help. I mean, obviously, it didn't heal everything, but it helped. The problem with the thing that is sexual violence and sexual trauma is it is not like you scraped your leg. It is like you had a your leg chopped off. You had a part of you that was taken,
Mm.
that it wasn't, that is going to be gone, and you can do stuff. You can get like an artificial leg. You can do a lot of other things. You can do, but you had something that was done to you that changed your life.
Mm.
And but obviously, a lot of people who lose their legs end up disabled people, end up being stronger because of they went through the experience,
Mm.
and now they have certain moral characters that are stronger. And I try to view it like that. And it's the same reason why I don't say I'm a rape victim and I say I'm a rape survivor.
Mhm.
Is because I did survive it. I'm still alive, and I'm going to keep on living.
And do you think that when you say there's like sometimes you become stronger, do you feel like that's partially your motivation to activism, or do you feel like that's something else? Or even like your reconceptualization of masculinity? I see both of those things as really powerful things that I don't feel like
I think the activism is probably the biggest,
mm,
because I wouldn't even be involved in this if it wasn't for these things that happened to me.
mm,
The difference, I talk about my problem with political hobbyism a lot, even though I do practice it in time from time to time.
mm.
Um,
What do you mean by
and
political hobbyism?
people who find like politics like, oh, this is interesting. I
Mm,
find I find I find it hard to understand. Like people who are like, oh man, this transportation stuff's really cool, or I love how these things intertwine and stuff. I can understand it to an extent, but I find it very strange because like I got involved in it because people are suffering, and I
yeah.
want to see that change. I didn't get involved in it because I found it like cute, right?
Hmm. I definitely hear
So
you on that.
I find that strange to me. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I find it strange. And that was a fuel that motivated me to do this. So I'd say that's that has had the most significant impact on my life, is because I got in politics because of my last conversation with my mother being about her lack of health care. I got into politics because of her homelessness, because of the drug abuse, because of the rape, because of the sexual abuse, because of the depression and violence and everything that was in my surroundings, because of my father's poverty, because of all these things that I went through.
Yeah.
I didn't go into activism because it was fun or it was hip or anything. I got into it because I saw it as an outlet, and I saw it as a solution. And I don't want anybody else to have to go through what I went through.
Absolutely. I absolutely hear you on that. Um, One thing I really wanted to make sure that we got to cover is what do you think? Have you had anyone who you've talked to that you felt like has been positively supportive and very helpful in talking to you about what happened?
My girlfriend has been nothing but an angel when it comes to this. She has helped me anytime I wanted to talk about my experience, and she helped me walk through it originally. And she is extremely supportive of me. And I don't know what I would have done without her support. And um, she is probably the most important person in my life, and that she's been extremely supportive.
What?
I would also say that A4 Andre was the first person who hosted a conversation with me about this, and Luop the God, who's a very small music streamer, was is another survivor who had a conversation with me about it publicly, and I bonded with him over that, which was really cool to be able to do that and have the conversation about two male survivors doing that publicly on Twitch, which I don't know of another example of that happening on this platform
Yeah, I
before. I think
haven't.
was the first. I think that was the first instance of it even happening on the platform.
That's incredible.
So, so that was great. Um, I would say those are probably the biggest instances I can think of.
So, what would you or what would you hope for? What are some of the things that they did that you would say to other people if they have a man in their life that has experienced sexual assault? What would you recommend to them to help men who have had these experiences?
Um, I would say that when you talk about it in a way that you could put anyone in the picture of the survivor, right? Don't talk about it in a way that specifically narrates the story towards this stereotyped version of what a rapist looks like against
Mhm.
this stereotyped version of what a victim looks like. Because a victim could be a big burly man like Terry Crews and you don't even know it.
Mhm.
Because victims are not a monolith. So I would say that's the first thing, that like this person did this to another person. A human being did this to another human being, and that's how we should talk about it, and that's how we should represent it in media. When men come out, make sure, of course, to support them, listen to them, and not ridicule them or mock them.
Mhm.
Another big thing, for me personally, is rape is not a punishment. Prison rape is still horrific, and it is not something that anybody should have to go through. I don't care what their crime was. Nobody should be raped. And I think that's the way
100%.
our media talks about prison rape is extremely disgusting,
Mhm.
extremely gross, and is also another example of how we dehumanize people who are in prison, incarcerated people, and it is extremely gross. And I would also want to say that that I think that when it comes to how we talk about young men being sexually abused and raped, because young minors cannot consent, needs to change. It is not young boy gets opportunity of a lifetime and sleeps with teacher. It is woman raped child. That's what it is.
Mhm.
It is if some story comes out and it is a teacher having sex with a child, that is a rape. The children cannot consent, and we need to stop pretending that it's some fun hip experience for the kid. No, even if the kid said they wanted it, too bad they can't consent. They cannot give conformed consent, and we need to change the dialogue around that. And if somebody gets up and say, "I lucky kid," a lot of survivors will come up and say something. I will, but a lot of them don't want to, and it's traumatic for them to think about it, even talk about it. Because, like I said, anytime I talk about it, I remember the feelings I felt when it happened.
Mhm.
I remember the taste. And so you stepping in and saying something there would be good.
Yeah.
So representation's important. Changing how we talk about prison rape is important. Changing how we talk about how young men are abused aren't is important. And I think just making it known to men, no matter how strong and powerful they feel in your life, and this is just generally for men's mental health, and which includes this, letting them know that you are there to support them if they need somebody to talk to about anything. Because a lot of men, it's very difficult for them to open up, and like it was difficult for me to open up even to my girlfriend.
Yeah.
And making it well known that you are there to listen to their problems, and they have a right to have problems, and they have a right to complain because they have a right to talk about their issues, and they deserve a platform as well.
I think that's so, especially like all of those points are so important and relevant to how our society currently is and talks about these issues. That last one is particularly striking. I hear so many men in my life, and I come back to my father who says, he'll talk about real issues in his workplace that are horrifying and then say, but I don't want to complain. And I think that says a lot about how people respond to men speaking up about serious struggles they're facing.
I still talk about that. I still do that. Like, I remember it was like my mom died, and the day after, I accidentally brought it up in conversation, but I said, like, at the end of it, I said, whatever, right? And my mom died.
Yeah.
It's just at the end of it, men don't want to be a burden. And
Hmm.
men feel like if they are putting any emotional weight on anybody else, they are a burden. So make it very clear that you are interested in helping them and you want to help them talk about their issues, and they are not a burden.
Hmm.
That is your active want.
Hmm.
Makes it easier.
I think that's helpful because sometimes I do wonder, like, I know guys have a lot of issues speaking up, and I'm like, how can I be more supportive? So I think that's a very helpful tip to me personally. Um, and I think the last thing I really wanted to get into was, do you have anything you would like to say to the men in the audience that have gone through similar experiences as your own?
You're not alone. You have every right to feel the feelings you're feeling about it. That is, you are no less of a man for having what happened to you happen to you, and that you have no clue, but there's probably people throughout your life who have gone through similar experiences and just haven't talked up about it. And if you don't know anybody else who's gone through it, now you do, because I have. And uh, if you need somebody to talk to, I usually don't send an open invite to fans to just DM me because I don't have the time, but I will make a special exception for this. That if you do need somebody, I am here.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate your time, Dylan. Thank you. Your time and the energy that it takes to do something like this. Thank you sincerely. I appreciate that. And it seems like,
Thanks for giving me a platform.
yeah, absolutely. Would you mind letting people know where they can find you? What do you do on the internet, Dylan,
Oh,
by the way?
I have much less productive discussions like this every Friday with the Hippy Dippy Roundtable. And I also host foreign policy discussions. I do React Andy content. Sometimes I play video games. You can find me at Dylan Burns TV on Twitch. That's DYLAN BURNS TV. On YouTube, it is the same thing. DYLAN BURNS TV. And on Twitter, you can follow me at Dylan Burns 1776 because I'm a true American. That's DYLAN BURNS 1776 on Twitter. Any support is appreciated. I'm trying to really keep up my streaming. I'm doing 6 hours every weekday now from 6 p.m. EST, which is 5 p.m. PST for all you Pacific wrong time zone people, to midnight. So I'd appreciate any support you want to throw my way.
All right. Thank you so much. Chat, I will be right back. I'm going to disappear with Dylan really quick. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about masculinity. And so give me just one moment and I'll see you all then.